Today's daf in Masechet Shavuot is daf tet, number 9, and we are up to the 2 dots. At least that's where he got up to, but it's a good place to be. 2 dots from the end, the 2 dots at the end of Chet Amabet, so 9 lines from the bottom. It's a good place, even though there's 2 dots on top of daf tet, but that's really the middle of the sugya. So, if you recall, I'm in the right daf, right, Miriam?
Yeah.
That's like my panic that someone's going to tell me I did the wrong daf. So remember the Mishnah, it's a little confusing, but not to those of us who are experts at this by now, right? So the Mishnah introduced basically the fact that the Sa'ir, which is an animal that was brought as a Karban Chatat on all of the holidays, basically, and on Rosh Chodesh, that the Sa'ir is there to bring a kapara for something. The question is what? Now it's a good thing that today's parsha was Achrei Mot, because we're very familiar now with all these psukim that are going to be relevant in yesterday and today and tomorrow's daf, right? So on Yom Kippur, there were 2 Sa'irim. There was a Sa'ir Anaseh Bifnim, which is the Sa'ir Lashem, really, that was brought inside the Beit HaMikdash, that was sacrificed and sprinkled the blood inside the Kodesh. There was the regular Sa'ir HaMusaf, which is the Sa'ir Hanaseh B'chutz, not the Sa'ir Lazazel, right? A regular Musaf. The same Sa'ir, or similar Sa'ir, is done on every holiday. So Rosh Hashanah, on Sukkot, on Shmini Atzeret, on Atzeret, and on Pesach, and on Rosh Chodesh. Okay? And our Mishnah said, and we'll see a little more today, but we learned this yesterday, that the purpose of that Sa'ir was to cause forgiveness for sins that have to do with Tumat, Mikdosh, Uktoshav, which is, the Torah says, if you're Tameh, don't eat Kachim, and don't walk into the Beit HaMikdash. And if you do that on purpose, you're Chayiv Karet. You get really severe punishment. If you do it by mistake, meaning you forgot, then there's a Karban Olev Yored. But we said in our Mishnah that the Karban Olev Yored only works for people who once knew they were Tameh, right? They forgot they were Tameh. They then walked into Beit HaMikdash or ate Kachim. Then they found out, oh, I did that by mistake. Then they bring the Karban Olev Yored. So you have Yediyah B'tchila and Yediyah B'sof, and you forget in between. What about the case of, yesterday we had the case, what if you knew that you were Tameh, you forgot, you walked into the Beit HaMikdash, and you never knew that you did that wrong? So we said that's where the Sa'ir HaNaseh Bifnim is Mechaper. Now, it's not really Mechaper, it's Toleh. It holds off your sin. Once you remember that you did that wrong, you bring a Karban Olev Yored. But until that time, and if you die without knowing, then this forgives that sin. So that was the first case. The next case in the Mishnah, which is what we're up to today, is, let's say, Ein ba yediyah b'tchila v'yesh ba yediyah b'sof. This case, you didn't know you were Tameh. You walked into the Beit HaMikdash. Someone called you up and said, oh, by the way, last Tuesday at the birthday party, everyone became Tameh, right? So you only found out after the fact. So then the Olev Yored is not a good Karban for you. But the Sa'ir, I'm reading now in the Gemara, Sa'ir Naseh B'chutz, Yom Kippur Mechaper. Then the Sa'ir that's done outside on Yom Kippur is Mechaper. And the Mishnah said, why? Because we compared the Sa'ir HaNaseh B'fnim to the Sa'ir HaNaseh B'chutz, just like one is Mechaper on Tumah, the other is Mechaper on Tumah. They're different cases, right? One is a case of Tumah where you knew before but didn't know after, and this is a case where you didn't know before but you knew after. Ask the Gemara now today, the 2 dots. Michti, look, Itgushi Itkish Lahadad. You're comparing them to each other. You're saying what the outside one is Mechaper for, or sorry, what the inside one is Mechaper for, the outside one is Mechaper for. So why don't you say it's the same thing? Let the one done inside be mechaper for its sin and for the sin of the chitzon, meaning for both those who knew before and didn't know after, and those who knew after but didn't know before. Now you're going to ask, why do you need to have a kapara bifnim for something you're about to do 30 minutes later b'chutz? Nafkamina leichad lo avad chitzon. Right? Let's say you ran out of animals, or you ran away in the middle of Yom Kippur. Right? You never did the avodah of the chitzon. How do you know that the inside Sa'ir is not mechaper for that which is done outside? Amarkra, that's based on the pasuk of Achat. It says Achat b'shana, right? Well, this is the pasuk at the end of in Kitisa, actually, that you mechaper on this mizbeach once a year. Kapara Achat mechaper in mechaper shtei kaparot. There's only one kapara from the mizbeach pinimi, and that is one, which is meaning you knew before, you didn't know after, and not 2. So what about the opposite? Let's say again that the Sa'ir HaNaseh B'chutz is similar to Lam B'fnim, and it's mechaper on its thing and on the thing of the Pnimi. And Nafkamina L'Tumah Dira Ben Zelazeh. right? Let's say you do the Sayar Nasa Bifnim in the morning. 2 hours later, you do the Sayar Nasa B'chutz, but in between, someone was Tameh. So maybe it will be Mechaper for that person. Amarkra, therefore, the end of the pasuk is Achat Bishana, meaning it's once a year. Kapara zu lo tehei el Achat Bishana. It's not just that it's one Mizbeach, it's once a year. So that is how you know that the two Sirim of Yom Kippur are Mechaper on different things. Says the Gemara now, interesting question. What about Rabbi Yishmael? Now, Rabbi Yishmael's an opinion, which we quoted before, and is a very important opinion, right? The basic principle that I said in the beginning, which is true, according to everyone but Rabbi Yishmael, is that the carbon olev yored is brought if you knew before that you were tameh, you forgot, and then you found out that you were tameh and did this act of walking into the Beit HaMikdash. So yediyah b'tchila and yediyah basof. But if you knew at the end, but didn't know in the beginning, you can't bring a carbon olev yored, and that's where the Seir of Yom Kippur is mechaper. But according to Rabbi Yishmael, you can bring a carbon olev yored in that case. That if you didn't know you were tameh, you walked into the Beit HaMikdash, and then someone later said to you, oh, by the way, you're tameh from yesterday, you bring a carbon olev yored. So then the Seir of Yom Kippur should not be mechaper for that because you have a different carbon for that. So ask the Gemara, Rabbi Yishmael, top line of Daf Tet, Damar Ein Ba Yediyah B'Tchila, if you didn't know before you did the action, but Yeshiba Yediyah B'Sof, but you knew after the fact, Bar Karbanu, you can bring a carbon olev yored, so then you don't need a Seir for that. You have your own carbon. So then Seir Naseh B'Chutz Amay Mechaper, Seir Naseh B'Chutz on Yom Kippur, what is Mechaper for? So he would say, for the next case, which is, Ashe'im Ba Yediyah Lo B'Tchila V'Lo B'Sof, where you don't know at all. You never knew you were tameh, not before and not after. Meaning you did this like people do sins all the time, unconsciously, right? They don't know. You never found out you were tameh. You walked into Beit HaMikdash, you walked out, you're as happy-go-lucky as ever. You have no idea that you did something wrong. Says, well, that's nice that you can be mechaper on Yom Kippur for that. But we said in the Mishnah, and we're going to continue today with the Limud, that Hai Sirei Regalim Sir Rosh Chodeshim Mechaprim. That's what we have Sirim on the holidays for. To mechaper people who do sins unknowingly. Says the Gemara, well, suffer like Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yishmael will have to hold like Rabbi Meir. The Amar kol sa'asirin kaparatan shaveh, that all the Sirim, meaning all the Sirim except for the Sayar Nasa Bifnim, which is its own category, but all the regular Sirim, including Yom Kippur and Rosh Chodesh and Yom Tif and right every Chag, they're the same. They're all mechaper tumat mikdash ukdoshav, meaning on someone who does sins in the Beit HaMikdash and never knows they did them. They didn't have yediyah b'tchila and they didn't have yediyah b'sof. Says the Gemara, well, if that's the case, if the sayar naseh b'chutz is not similar to the one that's done b'fnim, meaning it's like every other holiday, so then what's the comparison in the pasuk, right? That your outside is like the inside. Says the Gemara, well, that's telling you the negative part, which is Ma pnimi, which we learned yesterday, Eino mechaper b'shar averot. Right? Remember, we asked yesterday, how do you know this only works for Tumat Mikdash Ukdoshav? Maybe the Sa'ir is mechaper for any sins that a person does. And we learned yesterday that it's not, it's only for Tumat Beit HaMikdash. So that's what we learned from the Hekesh, that Ma pnimi, Eino mechaper b'shar averot, just like the Sa'ir Nasa B'fnim is not mechaper for other sins, like Chilul Shabbat or Znut or anything like that. So too, the Sayar Nasa B'chutz and Rosh Chodesh and Regalim are not mechaper for other sins. And we're going to keep asking that question, but that's how at least we know on Yom Kippur. So that is the second part of the Mishnah, or whatever we're up to, third part. The next case in the Mishnah, spoken, now we're quoting the Mishnah, the two dots on Daf Tet Amud Aleph, Al She'im B'Yediyah B'Tchila V'Lo B'Sof. Person did not know they were tameh, they never found out. Right? They touch something tameh, which probably happens all the time. You're sitting on the train. The guy next to you has I don't know, something tameh in their pocket. It touches you. You have no idea. You go to the Beit HaMikdash, you go inside, you do your avoda, you leave. You're unknown, right? Totally ignorant of this sin. So the Mishnah said, then, this was Rabbi Yehuda's opinion, that both Rosh Chodesh and the Regalim are mechaper for that sin. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, my time with Rabbi Yehuda. What's the source of Rabbi Yehuda? Because Amar Krana, this pasuk says this is the pasuk by Rosh Chodesh, which we read every Rosh Chodesh, very, very commonly read. Usi'ir izim echad lechatat lashem. You bring a sa'ir izim lechatat to Hashem. Now it's a real strange thing. Why don't you just say sa'ir izim echad lechatat? What's la Hashem, right? Why do we add? And we don't say that by any of the other chatot. Why do we say La Hashem? It's telling you that it's a sin, chet she'ein makir bo el Hashem. It's a sin to God, meaning it's a sin that only God knows about, which is, right, Yehi Seir Zeh Mechaper. So this is a sin that is only known to God, meaning a sin that no human knows because you didn't know before and you didn't know after. So something like that, a sin, a mistake that you made that was only known to God, that's where this Seir of Rosh Chodesh is Mechaper. We'll ask about Regalim in a minute, but that's how we know Rosh Chodesh. Says Gemara, that's a nice limud, but we already used that pasuk for something else. Haimi Bai Le Likid Reish Lakish. The Reish Lakish, the very famous, this is a very well-known statement of Reish Lakish, the first wide line. It says Reish Lakish, Manishtaneh Seir Shel Rosh Chodesh Nemer Bo La Hashem. Why? Reish Lakish asked this question. Why does it say Seir La Hashem at Rosh Chodesh? It doesn't say that anywhere else. So why is that? Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, the very famous Gemara that I think Rashi quotes, if I recall, says God, Sa'ir Zeh Yehi Kapara Al Shemi Atatiyat Yareach. This Sa'ir should be a forgiveness for me, for God. This is basically God bringing a korban. Now, of course, God, Bnei Yisrael brings the korban for God. I don't know if everyone has it on their side of their Gemara, but my Gemara gets, very upset by this statement. And there's a disclaimer. Don't take this seriously, it says on the side of my Gemara.
Well, I just finally got around to Kish Levana tonight.
Oh, right. Perfect. So, but forget about whatever this means. Obviously, we don't know. I don't know if everyone has that on the side, but mine has that. Don't take this seriously. But what Reish Lakish says is that God basically is saying, I, quote unquote, sinned or caused damage or harm to the moon by being mi'et the yareach, right? The Torah initially talks about Shnei Amarot HaGedolim, right? The two great celestial bodies, the sun and the moon, and then somehow, the sun took over and the moon became smaller, and there's a whole medrash, right? The moon was made smaller by Hashem, but either way, God brings a kapara for harming or damaging or making smaller the moon, whatever that means. But that's what Reish Lakish says from this pasuk. So that the pasuk of Rosh Chodesh is chatat la Hashem. So you can't darshan it to say about an act that only Hashem knows. Im Kain, says the Gemara, Lemakra, Torah could have just said al Hashem, because it's chatat al Hashem, chatat for God. My la Hashem, to Hashem, the kedamar. It's to tell you that it's something that only God knows about. Well, maybe it's all it tells you. How do you know it's telling you what Reish Lakish said? Im Kain, Lemakra, chatat Hashem, my la Hashem, shma min atarti. So you see both. You see that the chatat is for an act only known to God, which is a sin that a person commits but doesn't know about, right? And it's essentially a sin of God as well, of miyat the yarech. Okay, so that is the drasha for Rosh Chodesh. Now, ask the Gemara, I don't understand. It says a sin that only God knows about. How do you know that it's limited to Tumat Mikdash? Name B'chaper Nami Afilu B'shar Aveirot. Maybe this is a beautiful statement. It would sound wonderful that the Karban of Rosh Chodesh comes for all sins that people commit that they don't know about, right? Meaning anytime a person does something wrong, which like I said is probably pretty common, right? And then Mechal Shabbat, or they eat something, whatever it is, and they don't know about it. So if you know about it, you bring a Karban Shogeg, a Karban Chatat, right? If you do it on purpose, you get killed, right? But if you do it by mistake, you bring a Karban. But what if you never found out about your mistake? So you did something wrong, but you don't know. Maybe Rosh Chodesh is coming to Mechaper for that. How do you know it's only for Tumat Mikdosh Ukdoshav? The answer is the Gemara, 5 lines from the bottom. Tana the Be'er of Yishmael. So they taught in the Be'er of Yishmael. Well, Hoel v'zeh ba b'zman kavua. Right, this karban of Rosh Chodesh comes once a month, meaning it's a fixed karban. It's not a at-will kind of karban. You bring it when you feel like you need to bring it. You have to bring it at fixed times. And zeh, the karban of Yom Kippur, ba b'zman kavua. Right, that one also comes, of course, on Yom Kippur. Just like the sin of the chatat, the asham of Yom Kippur is mechaper on tumat mikdosh ukdoshav. Avzev Rosh Chodesh ino mechaper on tumat mikdosh ukdoshav. So basically, the Torah is telling you that whenever you have fixed karbanot, they are there for sins specifically to the Beit HaMikdash. It's not a thing you bring when you want; it's a thing you bring at a set time, and that's what it's mechaper for. So that is the source, that Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for sins that are unknown, only known to God. And from Yom Kippur, we learned that it's a sin that's only Tumah. And so that's how we know that Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for Ein Bo Yediah Lo B'Tchila V'Lo B'Sof. Says the Gemara now, 3 lines in the bottom, that's helpful for Rosh Chodesh. Ashkechan Sirei Rosh Chodashim. But what about Sirei Regalim Minalan? How do you know that the regel, that the Sa'ir on the regel is mechaper on the same thing? Says the Gemara, well, maybe. Why don't we just learn it out from the same Tana Rabbi Yishmael, which is, the Rabbi Yishmael said, whenever something is a Zman Kavua, it's a fixed thing, it's mechaper on Tumat Mikdash Ukdoshav. So on the regalim are fixed, right? So the same way Yom Kippur is fixed and Rosh Chodesh is fixed, why don't you say the same thing? Says, well, Ikal Mifrach, because I could ask a question that Imi the Rosh Chodesh, if you want to say the regalim should be like Rosh Chodesh, but Rosh Chodesh is much more common than the regalim. Shkem Tadir. It's much more often. So therefore, maybe the kapara is stronger. Imi Yom Kippurim, if you want to learn from Yom Kippur, Shkem Meruba Kaparato. Right, Yom Kippur is a day that's all about kapara, as we read today in Achrei Mot. It's mechaper on Bnei Yisrael, it's mechaper for everything. So how can you compare the holidays to Yom Kippur? The Chitem asked the Gemara, turn the page, Daf Ted Amabet. Hagamina Rosh Chodesh Midi Yom Kippurim. This Gemara, that seems like you're very selectively asking questions. How could you say, how do you learn Yom Tif from Yom Kippur? Yom Kippur is more forgiveness. But we just learned Rosh Chodesh from Yom Kippur, and you didn't ask that question, right? Hagamina Rosh Chodesh Yom Kippurim, Lo Parchinan, you didn't ask us why are you learning Rosh Chodesh from Yom Kippur, right? And Yom Kippur is Kaparatal Meruba. Rosh Chodesh, you said was fine. It says, well, that's different. Because Hatam Kapara Michtach TV. There, the Torah says on Rosh Chodesh that the korban is done for kapara, right? It's a series of chatat Hashem, but right, we understand chatat Hashem to be a kapara. But our question that we answered with Yom Kippur was maybe it's for more sins, not just the Beit Hamikdash, right? And so we said, well, we learned from Yom Kippur that just like Yom Kippur is only mechaber on Tumat Mikdash Ukdoshav, so too Rosh Chodesh is only mechaber on Tumat Mikdash Ukdoshav. But we didn't use Yom Kippur to tell me that it's mechaber on anything. We knew that from the pasuk. Hacha, aval hacha, third line, maybe there's no kapara whatsoever. How do you know that there is a kapara at all from the karban of Asham brought on holidays? So that's what we're saying. You can't learn from Yom Kippur because Yom Kippur is a day of kapara. By Rosh Chodesh, we knew it was a kapara. We were using Yom Kippur to limit the kapara. It's only for Tumat Mikdash Ukdoshav and not everything else. So how do you know? Ella says, the way you know, Kida'amar Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina. It's in fact from the very same famous common statement of Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina, which we're going to have tomorrow, which is, if you recall, right, the Torah in Parshat Pinchas goes through all of the Musafim, and of course that's what we read and we lane on every holiday, right? And it goes through them, if you recall, just to remind you, there are 13 listed there. It's an interesting number because it counts for Rosh Chodesh, which is listed first, right? And then I'm going to leave out Shabbos, even though it's mentioned there too, but we're going to leave that out because it's not a holiday. And then it does Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, it does Pesach, Atzeret, goes in that order. Pesach, Shavuot, then Rosh Hashanah, then Yom Kippur, then Sukkot, and then Shmini Atzeret. But if you recall that unlike Pesach, which is one reading that we read the same every day, on Sukkot, there's 7 different psukim about the karbanot, right? Because remember, they changed the parim that you brought every day. It went down in number. So there's altogether 7 for Sukkot and Shmini Atzeret and Pesach and Shavuot and Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur and Rosh Chodesh. So there are, I think, 13 in total. And by each one, except for 2, which we're going to get to tomorrow, it says Usair, right? Echad chatat l'Hashem, right? So you bring one Sa'ir, but there's a Vav. So says Rabbi Chama, Rabbi Chanina, we're going to have this tomorrow, Sa'ir Usair. And Hachanami, we're going to darshan the same thing. That's Sa'ir Usair. The extra Vav is to tell you, it's a hekesh of Sirei Regalim, Sirei Rosh Chodeshim. To compare the Sa'ir of the Regalim to the Sa'irim of Rosh Chodesh. Ma Sirei Rosh Chodeshim Einu Mechaper Al Shem B'Yidiyah Lo B'Tchiv Lo B'Sof. Just like we proved in Amud Aleph, that the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh is Mechaper when a person has no knowledge of the sin, when it's only known to God. Af Sirei HaRegalim, so to the Sa'ir of the Regal, Einu Mechaper Al Shem B'Yidiyah Lo B'Tchiv Lo B'Sof. So the Sa'ir Regalim are the same status, and they're Mechaper when you have no knowledge. And so that is the sort of first opinion of the Mishnah, that everything works out the right way. Again, just a quick review. The Sa'ir HaNaseh Bifnim on Yom Kippur is mechaper on those who knew beforehand and didn't know afterwards, so it's toleh until they find out. The Sa'ir HaNaseh B'chutz on Yom Kippur is mechaper, it forgives if you didn't know before, but you found out after the fact. And all the other Seirim of Rosh Chodesh and the Regalim are mechaper when you have no knowledge of the sin. So that's the first opinion in the Mishnah. Pause for a drink. Okay, continues the Gemara now. I have 2 dots in my, maybe I don't have 2 dots. Anyways, we're 10 lines from the top. Ibailu. Ask the Gemara an interesting side question. Ki Amar Reb Yehuda she'en ba'yidiyah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sof. Right? Reb Yehuda says that the karban of Rosh Chodesh and the regalim is mechaper if you did a sin and you had no idea about it. What does that mean? You have no idea about it. So does that mean hani mili b'chet she'en sofo liyodea? Does it mean that you really have no idea? Right? You walked into a room which had a dead body. You didn't know the body was there. You walked out. You went to the Beit HaMikdash. You're never going to find that out, right? But what about a sin where you're going to find out? Meaning, you don't know at the time of Rosh Chodesh that you did the sin, but somebody else knows, or there's video camera, and you're going to get the report. You're going to get the call. By the way, 2 months ago, there was a dead body in the same building as everyone, and everyone who went to Yankee Stadium on that day is Tameh, right? So someday you're going to find out about it. Maybe is that kemishi yesh yediyah b'sof dami? Is that as if you're gonna know? And sa'ir naseh b'chutz Yom Kippur mechaper. Remember the sin, the kapara for that is if you didn't know before but you knew after, then the sa'ir naseh b'chutz Yom Kippur is mechaper. So is that which category does that fall into? O Dilmar, do you say afilu chetche sofo liyoda? Even if you're going to eventually find out hashtamia chetche in makir ba'ala Hashem karina bey. At this moment, this Rosh Chodesh or this Sukkot, you don't know about it, and only God knows about it, and therefore the karban makes you forgiven. Now, of course, there's nothing you can do about this, right? The reality is the reality, but he's just asking, how does he view it? So Tashma, we in fact have a Braita which speaks this out. The Tanya, the Braita says, Asheim ba'yidiyah lo b'tchila v'lo b'sof. If you didn't know before or after, and continues the Braita, v'chet shesofo liyodeya, and even a sin which you're going to find out about, but you don't know about right now, sirei regalim, sirei Rosh Chodesh, mechaprim, divrei Rabbi Yehuda. So that is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that as long as right now you don't know that you did the sin and you didn't know before, then the sa'ir of the regel or the sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh is a kapara for you. So that's the first opinion in the Mishnah. The second opinion in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon Omer, we're at the 2 dots halfway down. Rabbi Shimon says, I disagree. Si'ireya regalim mechaprim. That in fact the sa'ir brought on the holidays, on Rosh Hashanah, on Sukkot, and Pesach, and Shavuot, and Shmini Atzeret, would be a kapara for Tumah where you didn't know before or after. Avolo sirei Roshei Chodashim. But not the sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh. Remember the Gemara, that the Mishnah continued and said, what is the sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh mechaper for? And we came up with a new case. And the new case is a tahar shachal tameh. Remember that every case that we've talked about till now is a tameh person who ate kachim or walked into the Beit HaMikdash. There you're chayiv karet if you did it on purpose. A tahar that eats tameh is prohibited, but it's not a chayiv karet, right? It's a mita b'dei shamayim. But you're not, so that's a sort of a lower level sin. So Rabbi Shimon said that's where Rosh Chodesh comes from. Rosh Chodesh comes from that sin of a tahar person who eats tameh food. Tameh, not food, tameh hektish, right? Tameh kachim. So now, ask him, how does he know that? Amar Belazar, Amar Boshaya, my time with Rabbi Shimon. Amar Krab, the pasuk says, and this pasuk is not today's pasuk. This is where's this pasuk? At the end of this is in Parshat Shmini, right? It says, "V'oto natan lachem laseta et avon ha'eda." This is talking about well, anyways, let me go through the background here, right? Remember, this was the story of Yom HaShmini, which, if you recall, Yom HaShmini in the Miluim was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, right? Remember, the 8th day of the Miluim was the first day of Nisan, which was the day that the Shekhinah came down in the Mishkan and the oil came up. Unfortunately, on Yom HaShmini happened what we mentioned today in the parsha, the death of the Shnei B'nai Aaron, right? So if you recall, then in Parshat Shmini, it talks about the Shnei B'nai Aaron died, and then Moshe gives Aaron and his sons, Elazar and Itamar, who are notarim, instructions on not being mitabel and not leaving the Beit HaMikdash. And then all of a sudden, Moshe gets really upset, right? The psukim, let me read the psukim. Remember, this is a very famous psukim because it's the middle of the Torah, right? It says, this is in Parshat Shmini, it says, where am I? It says the at Sa'ir Chatat. I'm in Parak Yud, Pasuk Tet Zayin. The Sa'ir Chatat Darash Darosh Moshe. Remember, those words are the middle of the Torah. Moshe asked about it. V'inei soraf. It had been burnt. They had not eaten it the way you're supposed to eat the regular karban. They had actually burned it. Vayiksof Elazar v'Elatimar ben Aaron. Moshe got angry at Elazar and Itamar, and he said, "Madua lo achaltem et hachatat mekom hakodesh? Why didn't you eat it?" And then he continues, and these are the psukim. This is the words that we're about to darshan. The ota natan lachem. It was given to you. Laseit et avon ha'eda, to carry the sin of the people. L'chaper alechem l'fnei Hashem, to be a kapara. So why did you burn it, right? And then the pasuk continues. They said we burnt it because it was tamei, etc. But Moshe got upset with them and said, "Why did you not eat the karban of the Rosh Chodesh, which is the karban of the day?" So let's read that inside now. Says Rabbi Oshaya, my time with Rabbi Shimon, Amar Kra, it says the ota, it, referring to the karban of Rosh Chodesh, Natan lechem, I gave to you laseit et avon ha'eda, to carry the sin of the people. Now, Haikra b'sa'ir de Rosh Chodesh ktiv. Right, that pasuk is referring to the sin, the sa'ir of the chatat of Rosh Chodesh. And what is these words, avon ha'eda? It's not really so much avon, it's laseit, right? You carry the sin, yalef avon mitzitz. We compare avon from the tzitz. Nemar kan avon ha'eda by the karban of Rosh Chodesh. Nemar lahalan, it says by the tzitz that Aaron will wear the tzitz on his forehead, and it will carry the avon of the people, right? Avon. This is the people, the avon of the kadashim. Ma lahalan tumat basar, afkan tumat basar. So just like the function of the tzitz is to carry the sin of kachim, so too the function of the karban of Rosh Chodesh is to carry the sin of tumah. Remember, if you recall, we discussed the tzitz elsewhere, especially in Yuma, but we discussed it in many places, and we'll have it more. The function of the tzitz, part of it at least, was that if a person brought a karban to the Beit HaMikdash and it became tamei by mistake, and they burned it on the mizbeach, it still counts for that person. Right? Let's say you get a call from the Kohen saying, we made a big mistake, your chatat became tamei, they still get a kapara from that karban chatat, right? The tzitz cleans off, it's miratzeh, it kashers the tumah of karbanot, right? So says the Gemara, just like the tzitz kashers the tumah of the karbanot, so too the karban of Rosh Chodesh kashers the tumah of a person who went into the Beit HaMikdash by mistake, not by mistake, the person who is tahar shachal tamei. Right, a tahar person who ate food that's tamei. So just like if food is put on the mizbeach b'tumah, the tzitz makes it kodesh Hashem. If a person eats food by tumah by mistake, the karban of Rosh Chodesh is a kapara for that person from the fact that it says avon by both of those. Right? Ask the Gemara, well, how do you know that? Imal halan olin afkan olin. Well, remember, a tzitz is mechaber on karbanot that go on the mizbeach. Here we're saying you have a karban that's tamei and you ate it. You didn't put it on the mizbeach. So how do you know it's referring to a person eating a karban or hektish that's kachim that's tamei? Says the Gemara because afkan olin. Answer the Gemara avon ha'edachtiv. It says the sin of the people, not the sin of the karban, the sin of a person, meaning a person who ate something. But tumah, that's where the karban of Rosh Chodesh is mitchaper. Says Gemara, okay, so that's a nice limud, but michti. Look, migmar gamir madadi, just like we started off today asking about the Sa'ir and Yom Kippur of inside and outside, you're now comparing the tzitz to the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh. We're learning one out from the other. So why don't you say that they actually overlap? Nichaper de Rosh Chodesh adidev adi tzitz. Why don't you say that the karban Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh functions like a tzitz, meaning it's mechaper on people who eat kachim, that's tamei, and it's mechaper on karbanot that are brought with tumah. Now, why do we need a sa'ir to be mechaper on karbanot brought with tumah if you have a tzitz? Nafkamina lecha dinishbar tzitz. Sometimes the tzitz would break, it would go out of commission. So let's say you ran out of the tzitz is not functioning, right? It's in the shop. So then, or it was lost, then maybe the karban of Rosh Chodesh functions like a tzitz because it said the word avon by both of them. Says the Gemara, no. It doesn't say the word avonot. Amarkra avon, singular. Avon echad hu nosei ve'en nosei shtei avonot. It doesn't say avonot b'nei Yisrael like it does say by the tzitz, but it says the word avon. So the word avon by Rosh Chodesh is one sin, meaning a tahar shachal tamei, not a second one. It says, what about the opposite way? Nichaper tzitz adidei ad Rosh Chodesh. Maybe the tzitz is mechaper both for karbanot that are brought b'tumah by mistake, and for what Rosh Chodesh is normally mechaper for a person who's tahar who ate tamei. And nafkamino tumat ira bein zeluzah. Be very helpful, right? Rosh Chodesh is not going to happen for 2 more weeks. So any people who did this mistake, they get a forgiveness from the tzitz. They don't got to wait for Rosh Chodesh. Amar Kra says, well, it says ota by Rosh Chodesh, right? It says ota natan lechem l'seitet avon eida. Ota nosei avon. It, meaning it, the karban of Rosh Chodesh carries the sin. Vein acheret nosei avon. And another thing, meaning the tzitz, is not mechaper the avon. Rav Ashi says, I have a better explanation or another explanation. You know, k'tiv hacha avon ha'eda. What do you need a hay for? Right? The hay is extra. You could have said avon eda. What does ha'eda tell you? The community, meaning eda below kachim. It's a limit. Only people, not kachim. And hatam by tzitz it says k'tiv avon ha'kadashim. So the hay there is also extra to tell you kadashim below eda, that the tzitz is meratzeh for kodesh, but not for people. So basically, according to Rabbi Shimon now, we're saying that in a funny way, the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh functions like the tzitz, like the thing that the Kohen Gadol wears on his head. And just like the tzitz is mechaper for an animal that is brought in Tumah on the Mizbeach, the karban of Rosh Chodesh is mechaper for a human, a tahar, who ate something that's kachim, that's tamei by mistake, a tahar shachal tamei. And so between those, you basically, that's how Rabbi Shimon learns out the function of Rosh Chodesh. Let me see if we should keep going. Maybe a little bit more, right? A few more? Okay. We're learning again in like 8 hours, so don't worry. Says the Gemara, Ashkechan Sirei Rosh Chodeshim L'Chapriel Tahar Shachal Tamei. Right? So that we just determined from sets that according to Rabbi Shimon, the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh is a forgiveness for a person who's tahar, who ate something tameh. What about Sirei Regalim? How does he know that Sa'ir of Regalim are mechaper on a person who is tameh, who went into the Beit HaMikdash, but had no yediyah before or after? If you recall, Rabbi Yehuda, the first opinion in the Mishnah, learned out the Regalim because they were similar to Rosh Chodesh, right? We know about Rosh Chodesh, the Regalim are learned from Rosh Chodesh, but according to Rabbi Shimon, Rosh Chodesh is for something else. So how does he know the Regalim? Answers the Gemara, that is Kedam Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina. As we quoted earlier today, and we're going to have again tomorrow, the statement of Rabbi Chama Rabbi Chanina, that it says, instead of saying the word Sa'ir, it says Usair, the extra vav. Hachanami Sa'ir Usair, which means Itkush, turn the top of Daf Yud Amud Aleph, we compare Sirei Regalim L'Sirei Chadashim, Roshei Chadashim, that you compare all the Sirim are similar in some ways by the Vav that combines them. Ma Sir de Rosh Chodesh b'milta de Kodesh mechapri, just like I established that the Sa'ir of Rosh Chodesh forgives something of Kachim where a Tahar Achalat Tamei, Af Sirei Harigalim b'milta de Kodesh mechapri. So too, the Sa'ir of the Regalim is mechaper for something with Kodesh, not the same thing. We'll see why in a second. And the thing that it's mechaper for is a person who went into the Beit HaMikdash b'tumah or ate kachim b'tumah and didn't know about it. I'm going to stop here. Let's stop here. 4 lines from the top. We'll continue this tomorrow because it'll be a good review. I hope everyone's up bright and early. We'll learn 7:45 a.m., which is 6:45 a.m. in Dallas. We'll be ready. Okay, Shavuot Tov. Have a good night.
Shavuot Tov.
Shavuot Tov, thank you.
Shavuot Tov, good night.
Good night.